Hello, everyone. My name is Devin Boyda, and I will be representing Team 2 in Presentation 3 as the researcher. So a general cover, I'll be discussing some key points in this overview. I will be talking about deduction versus induction, some different categories of fallacies, and then following it up with examples of ambiguous, presumptive, and then irrelevant fallacies with some examples. So deduction versus induction. Deduction can be classified as taking facts and using them to reach a conclusion. Oftentimes it's compared to mathematical equations. For example, 10 is larger than 5 and 5 is larger than 3. Therefore, 10 is larger than 3. So essentially we're using a fact and another fact to reach a conclusion. Induction, on the other hand, is a little different. It's where we take an observation and then use it to reach a theory. This induction is more closely related to making inferences. So, for example, if we see that a bear hibernates in the winter, then we can infer that most bears will be hibernating during the winter. I have some additional examples in the pictures below, but that is the key differences between deduction and induction. So there are three main categories of fallacies. There's fallacies of ambiguity, fallacies of presumption, and fallacies of irrelevance. Now, fallacies were discovered or coined by Aristotle back in 384 to 322 BC, somewhere in between that time frame. And nowadays, there are just dozens and dozens of logical fallacies. So you want to avoid logical fallacies is the key. And also, there are some logical fallacies that don't fall into these three categories. So I want to keep that in mind. So the first fallacy that I'm going to be talking about is composition. And this is a fallacy of ambiguity. And this is assuming that one instance is true for all instances of the same type. So the example that I would like to bring up is we'll use Bob. Bob is a model, and models are good looking. So all models must be good looking. Now, this seems to be like logical reasoning, like deduction. We discussed that earlier. However, it's not just by the fact that there are different kinds of models, and it's not a guarantee that a model is going to be good looking. And additionally, good looking is perspective based. So what I may think is good looking may not be the same for you. So this is actually a logic fallacy. Moving on, we have ambiguity, which of course would be classified as a fallacy of ambiguity. And by definition, ambiguous, so it's unclear and can result in different interpretations. So oftentimes we see this in politics where a question is asked and we'll say the president says, okay, I will take action. Well, it doesn't clarify exactly what kind of action is he going to take. There's lack of details, no specifications. And because of this, you have people thinking, oh, he's going to take action this way. And some people think he's going to take action that way, resulting in just sheer confusion. No one knows for sure what's happening. And this is a key logical fallacy that you want to avoid. Another logical fallacy would be the red herring logical fallacy. This is a fallacy of presumption. And essentially, it's just distracting or using misdirection to avoid a key issue by asking another question or just changing the topic. So that's the biggest thing when it comes to red herring is, and once again, you see this in politics a lot. Question will not be answered. They will use some kind of distraction tactic, change the topic, ask another question until people forget what the original question was and they're able to avoid the question. So now we have hasty generalizations. This is a fallacy of presumption. And this one's kind of cut and dry. We're just reaching a conclusion before having all the facts. So jump into conclusions is essentially what this is, and you want to avoid it. I would recommend gathering all the facts before making any kind of accusations or conclusions. Slippery slope is one of my personal favorites, and this is a fallacy of presumption. So using one truth to argue that a scenario will get worse and worse as a way of helping your position. That is the definition. And I mean, broken down, it's just stating something and then adding to it, even if it's not true. Like your first statement may be true, but compiling facts onto it that which may not necessarily be facts in order to help your case. And it is, in fact, slippery slope. So an example of this is we'll say, if you skip class, then you'll fail your class. Well, if you fail your class, then you're going to drop out of college. Well, if you drop out of college, you're going to become homeless. So don't skip your class because you don't want to be homeless. Now, this obviously isn't true, but it follows the pattern of deduction and like step for step how it's going to happen. You do this, therefore this happens. Unfortunately, there's lies mixed into it. So this is a logical fallacy that you should avoid with your writing. Another logical fallacy is ad hominem, which is a fallacy of irrelevance, our first one of irrelevance. And this is, instead of attacking a person's argument, you attack their character. This is a pretty common one that should be avoided. But when it comes to like debating in two different positions, you want to stick to the topic. So an example of this is, say that you're arguing with someone and they're like, the sky is blue. But you're like, you can't believe this guy. He's a liar. He murdered somebody. He's just the worst person. Can't believe a word out of his mouth. And you're attacking the guy instead of attacking the argument. I mean, the sky is blue, but you're basically saying that because of his character, you shouldn't believe him. And instead of attacking the argument. Basically, if you're going to try to argue with someone, make sure that you're arguing against their argument and not trying to use anything from their character to dissuade or help your argument. So the last one that I have that I'm going to talk about is appeal to ignorance. This is a fallacy of irrelevance. And there are several types of appeal to this or appeal to that. For example, appeal to authority, appeal to fear, but more specifically, we'll talk about appeal to ignorance. And this is just using a lack of evidence to make invalidated statements. So for example, I would be like, well, aliens live at the bottom of the ocean. This is true. And someone's like, no, they don't. It's like, well, you can't prove it. So technically it's true. Basically using anything that you can't prove to argue something's true. Just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it's true. And this is a logical fallacy that you should avoid. So in conclusion, using deduction and induction, good. We want to make sure we're using those in our papers and our position statements. Logical fallacies are bad. Keep an eye out for them in your writing and avoid them at all costs. So my audience questions are, what are some logical fallacies that you've witnessed? What strategies do you implement for avoiding using logical fallacies in your work? What is one example where you have used deduction or induction? That is it for my presentation. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.